You can go now, I think.
Okay. So, yep, good. Okay, let's start. Good morning, everybody. It's just gone 7 o'clock in the morning here in Venice Beach, California. It's 10 o'clock in the evening in Shanghai. It's 7:30 in Mumbai, India, and 10 o'clock in the morning on the East Coast. I'd like to welcome you to a very special event, the panel discussion on the theme of the future of education. This is part of an initiative called DigitalFUTURES that was started in 2011 by Philip Yuan and myself in Shanghai, in Tongji University, Shanghai. It was set up initially as a series of workshops and exhibitions and conferences. This year, of the 10th anniversary of DigitalFUTURES, we went online and we went global, and we had a massive event. There were 12,000 students there were 12,000 applications for our workshops. We had 80 workshops. And we also had a series of panel discussions on the theme of architecture in the age of COVID-19. Some very productive panel discussions, and especially one of the areas we looked at was the theme of the university. What were we going to do when we were all online? And out of those panel discussions, some interesting ideas came out. We had a panel discussion on the future of the university that was chaired by Nader Tehrani. We had a panel discussion on the use of technology in a post-pandemic future. And both of them began to sort of open up the question about how we should rethink the question of learning in the age of COVID-19, and especially how we could maybe in some ways democratize education. So today I'm delighted to be able to kind of draw upon that and build up upon that base with a session looking at the whole question about the future of learning in an age of COVID-19. We have 4 very special guests here this evening, today. I'd like to start with Nader Tehrani, who was the chair of the session on the future of the university. Nader is one of the most exquisitely talented architects that I know. He's also an authority within the university. He's now the dean at Cooper Union, and one of the most charming people that I know as well. So it's a great pleasure to have Nader Tehrani here today. I'd also like to welcome Areti Markopoulou. Areti is the director of IaaC, the Institute for Advanced Architecture of Catalonia, a very progressive school based in Barcelona, Spain, that has emerged as one of the powerful forces within architecture education in the last few years. Areti was part of a panel discussion that we had on the future of digital technologies in a post-pandemic era, if we ever get to that point, that was chaired by Akim Menges. And I'd also like to welcome someone who many of you might not know, Sarita Vijayan, who is not an architect. She is a lawyer, an editor, an urban activist, and a self-described youthologist who operates in Mumbai, India, and who has been extremely active, however, engaging with the world of architecture. She is the head of an organization called For Young India that is engaged with architectural practices like Zaha Hadid Architects, Foster and Partners, has engaged with Harvard GSD, and most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, she set up one of the most inspirational conferences called The Future of Architecture and Building, FAB, in Mumbai in December 2018, a conference to which many of the kind of leading figures in the world of computation and in architecture were invited, including Mark Burry, Michael Hansmeyer, Philippe Bloch, and so on and so on. That was a truly inspirational conference. And finally, I'd like to welcome our chief guest today, Sanjay Sarma, who is the director of Open Learning at MIT. He's also the author of a new book, Grasp, The Science Transforming How We Learn, a book about education, which he co-edited with Luke Yurchenko. I hope I pronounced that properly. I got to know Sanjay, as indeed a few others within the Digital Futures community did, through a conference that he organized, or his group organized, in an MIT event in a castle just outside Vienna in Austria, which was a very wonderful event. It was an event at which Biana Bogosian, Benas Farahi, Guvench Ozul, Daniel Boladan, and several of our team were members. So we're fortunate to take part of this. So the idea today is really to take the debates slightly further forward, the debates that we've had about education, and really to rethink about what happens in a world where we are teaching online, and how the various initiatives that have been spearheaded by schools such as MIT can sort of open up a new way of addressing education. I'm going to call upon Sanjay. Sanjay, can I just check you're ready there?
I'm ready. I'm so sorry.
Yes. No. Sanjay, who is sitting in front of the MIT campus there, to say a few words to kind of get up this discussion going about the Open Learning Initiative that's been so important, and about his the ideas contained in the book Grasp. And I'm especially interested in because both of those, I assume that the book must have been started about 2 or 3 years ago. Both of those, the whole event, I guess, of COVID-19 has caused us to reflect on all sorts of aspects of education. And I'm particularly interested to know how Sanjay looks at these ideas through the lens of COVID-19. So
Thank you very much. Yeah, Neil, I'm so sorry. You know, the appointment moved to 1 and I thought it's a beautiful day. Let me go for a hike with my wife in Minuteman National Park. And that's when I started getting the emails and hi, Nader, good to see you. So I'm back. Apologies. So let me just say that, how long would you like me to speak, Neil? Have a few minutes?
About 20 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So look, these are very strange times to begin with. I mean, here we are in the midst of COVID, speaking from our basements. I called you in from a national park, actually, as I said. But the strange thing is, first of all, I'd like to say the 21st century begins, you know, we think of the 21st century as beginning in 2000 or 2001, depending on how you count. But I really think the 21st century begins next year in 2021. The reason I say this is, the 2000s were basically the 1990s. You know, Amazon was already there, Google was already there. But we're spending 1 year in all walks of life retraining for a new future. And education is no exception. So for 20 years, 25 years, we've talked about online education, but it was always sort of a good to do. You did it if you missed a flight, a Zoom call. If you couldn't get to the university, you did it online. But suddenly 1.6 billion students in the spring of this year were online or separated from education. So it's this incredible disruption. Now, this disruption is putting in stark contrast everything we know and understand about what it means to get educated. So let's play this forward a little bit. So let's say 2021, we all have our vaccines. We'll all go back, hopefully, to residential education. And are we just going to replicate this except in the classroom? Is it going to be worth the while? That's the question that I think we need to ask ourselves. So let me pose it to you the following way. If you took a child away from the parent and said you can only see the parent through Zoom, and everything seemed fine, we'd be like, oh, that's not very human. That's not how we expect things to be, right? As COVID hit, we all moved to this remote existence and we got by. It wasn't so bad. That's not good news. It should not have been that easy. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, my view, and I'll talk about the book and I'll talk about open learning, is that we were doing something wrong to begin with. In many respects, our education system was socially distanced to begin with. And what Zoom did was, it just made it very obvious. What COVID did was, it just made it very obvious. Because when nature confiscated proximity from us, and when it grants us the privilege to have it back, we had better make it count. right? So that's sort of my opening statement. Now let me talk a little bit about the history of education, which I actually talk about in this book. So if you look at the way the education system as we know it has evolved, the first educational institutions, universities, go back to actually Takshila, which is a Hindu and Buddhist university in what is now Pakistan in the Indus Valley civilization from about 500 BC. By the way, they had entrance exams, they had professors, they had dorms, it was the whole shebang. And then in the 800s, 900s, a bunch of Islamic universities evolved. And there's one in Morocco from 900 AD. And that's where some concepts like the way we give degrees in Arabic, it's called ijazat. I'm not sure if it's the same in Farsi, in Nader. Ijazat means permission. It's an Arabic word, but it was a guild, and you gave permission for someone else to teach. And then the monastic universities of Europe were created. You know, we're talking about the Oxfords, the Bolognas, etc. And that's the system we have today. And then about 200 years ago, 300 years ago, when people came in from the countryside to the Industrial Revolution, you needed both childcare and you needed to prepare the next generation of workers. And that's how our high school system and our modern education system took off. So in other words, it was all an accident of history. The way we teach today is entirely an accident of history. And it was based on certain instincts, some monastic instincts, some religious instincts. And we treat it as if it came down on tablets from God herself or himself, right? That's how we treat it. When you actually look at how the human being learns, that science of learning has only evolved over the last 100 years, just like medicine, by the way, right? I mean, if you look at medicine, if you go back 100 years, our treatment options were very limited. We didn't have antibiotics, we didn't have x-rays. And the way we educated was, I mean, the way we treated patients was bloodletting. We did what we knew we could do, right? Bloodletting, right? Get good air, right? And hopefully things get better. And some treatments, we had some surgeries. Medicine, education is the same, except we follow our education system from 200 years ago as if it was a writ from some holy book. If you actually look at the science of learning, which is only like medicine, evolved in the last 100 years, as I said, you begin to realize some amazing things. The most fundamental fallacy you begin to realize is this. Our education system is based on the following misplaced and misconstrued or misstated dogma. It is that the student's mind is a sheet of paper and the teacher has a pen. And all the teacher has to do is write on the sheet of paper and declare victory. And if the student doesn't pay attention, you can wag a finger at them and make them feel bad. And then, of course, they'll wake up and pay attention. You can continue writing for 45 minutes, 1 hour, however long the lecture is, and you're done. And if the student doesn't make it, you get them at the exam, and you say, you're just not a good student. What the science tells us is that fundamental assumption is wrong. Actually, what the student is doing is building a model of the world. It's like a plant growing up. When the plant wants sunlight, you give the plant sunlight once a day. When the plant needs to be watered, you give it water. Too much water, you'll kill the plant. When it needs potassium at certain points in its development, you give it potassium or nitrogen, fertilizer. Not at the wrong times. By the way, there's a whole field now called precision agriculture. That's how you can grow, crops in the desert. It's called, precision irrigation, right? Precision fertilization. So you don't fertilizing, so that fertilizers don't go into the aquifer. So we know that's how a plant operates. The brain is no different. The brain is building a model of the world, and the role of the professor is to feed it on an as-demand basis and specialize it to every individual brain. Damn it. And it's so inconvenient, we ignore it. And I'm going to tell you why this model is actually very human. Now, when I started doing research I actually read the research of my colleagues in neuroscience and economics and behavioral science, all that stuff. We began to realize, I initially thought that what we would learn would be very clinical and cold. Something like exercise for 11.5 minutes eat proteins, study for 6 minutes, then do this, you know. But what I began to realize was the lessons from neuroscience, I couldn't really tell what they were. I'll tell you what they were in a minute. It was surprisingly, hauntingly familiar. They were surprisingly human, but I couldn't tell what it was. And then it began to dawn on me. It is exactly how children learn. All the deep neuroscience was telling us, I'm talking about adults even, that we have a species prerogative for learning and for teaching. It's called parenting. It's called being a child. Now, how many of us are parents here? Well, I am, right? If you're a parent, you know that the child's mind is not a sheet of paper that you write on. You know the child is forming a model of the world. And you know when to back off. And I'll give you some of the rules. The rules are things like the human brain. This, by the way, is the prefrontal cortex. It's the most recent evolutionary aspect of the brain. We did not, apes don't have this, right? That's why in some cultures, in India, for example, you put a dot there, right?
Heads up, there's smoke in the kitchen. The alarm may sound.
This has not been a good day.
It's loud.
Sorry. So, okay, I'm going to silence that. So it's been a strange day. That's my Nest warning me. Anyway, so what I'm saying was, this is the CEO of the brain. The CEO of the brain controls the way in which the human body operates. And then when we get information in, it goes into something in the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus digests that information and then spreads it out in the brain. Do you know how long we can pay attention? Can I take a poll? How long do you think you can pay attention to a boring lecture like this? Anyone?
10 minutes.
10
Max.
minutes. Max? Areti, you're exactly right. It's about 8 to 10 minutes. All right. But every lecture we do, every single lecture is 50 minutes, 90 minutes. You know what happens after 10 minutes? The brain has to digest this information coming in. By the way, after 10 minutes, what the brain wants to do, and this is the technical term, is something called mind wandering. That's literally the term. Okay. It goes into something called default mode, and the mind starts wandering and it's connecting the dots. But after, we don't stop at 10 minutes. Lectures, even this lecture is 20 minutes. I keep going on, right? After 10 minutes, the brain gets familiar with the work, with this stuff coming in, but doesn't actually learn it. It's actually worse than learning. It's called the illusion of learning. You declare victory. You think you learned it. You didn't. So you know what you should do after 10 minutes? I've been speaking 10 minutes. I'm going to try it on you. You should take a break. And then, and every parent knows this because the kid's eyes are rolling in their head, right? Backseat of the car, you're like, okay, I'm going to back off now. Right? But in the lecture, you just plow through. What you should do at the end of 10 minutes is ask questions about the stuff recently covered. So let me ask you, what is this thing called? Anyone? You're struggling. This is good.
The prefrontal cortex.
Very good. What was the thing that digests the incoming memories called?
Hippocampus.
Excellent.
Hippocampus.
Hippocampus, right? So what I just did was I played a trick on you, which is I forced you to search your short-term memory. And I took a break. And I'm giving you a directed opportunity to digest the material by asking you questions. And if one of you said something wrong, I would have probed a little bit more. And every parent knows this. And in doing so, I am facilitating and prioritizing your assimilation of the material you learned. You know, Duolingo does this. It's called the retrieval or testing effect. No professor, most professors haven't even heard of it. Okay, we took a little break, so let's go on. Now, at the end of 10 minutes, I promise you I'll talk about digital learning in a few minutes, okay? At the end of 10 minutes, I ask you a few questions about the material just covered, but I actually have 30, 40 questions that I could have asked you. So what should I do with those remaining 20 questions? Should I ask you tonight, tomorrow morning? What should I do? Anyone guess?
Sounds good. Tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow
or
morning?
evening.
Okay. The answer actually is,
Don't forget.
the answer is I put them in my back pocket. I should ask you tomorrow morning, next week, next month, next year. Here's why. When you learn something, your brain is incented to forget it. Because there's too much input, right? Here's the strange thing. You remember the things that you were reminded of just about when you were about to forget them. So I've got to give you time to begin to forget it, and then I remind you. By the way, and that's called spaced learning. And the spacing is sort of exponential, you know, a day, a week, a month. But most courses end in 3 months, 4 months, you're done, right? And you pack it up, right? But if you can recall it, and by the way, Duolingo does that too, right? Babbel does that. All these language programs do it. Most professors haven't heard of it. Project-based learning, when you do a project later, forces you to recover stuff. So it's good, right? This is the neuroscientific basis for this. By the way, this has been replicated in fruit flies. Fruit flies don't go to college generally. They do actually, but not to go to college. And it's not our target market. But I'm saying this because that's how fundamental this is. Here's another one. Let's say I'm teaching you, I don't know, what's an interesting field? Let's say I'm teaching you Impressionist painting, my favorite, right? The Impressionists. So let's say that I show you a Monet painting and a Seurat painting. Okay. Should I do Monet, 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 Seurat, 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 or Monet, Seurat, Monet, Seurat, Monet, Seurat? Anyone?
I'll vote for Monet Seurat.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And the reason is the brain learns in the switching, because you got to upload into your brain the framework for Seurat before you look at Seurat. And it's the uploading that's the learning. Once you upload Seurat, if you do 3 Seurats, you know, incrementally, I'm not adding very little. This even works with sports. So if you're learning tennis, do serve, volley, go to the back. For those of you watching the US Open, right? Play from the back court, do a volley. Play from the back court. If you just do from the back court, you've already uploaded the program. It's the re-upload that's learning cursing. Switch, switch, switch. But remember, every chapter in every book is the Seurat section, the Seurat chapter, and the Monet chapter. I could go on and on. Here's another little final tidbit. It's a trick I've been playing on you. You don't realize it. The human brain, like our digestive system, the mouth, when you're hungry, the mouth generates saliva. And saliva digests incoming food. The brain generates something called dopamine when it's hungry. But let me ask you a question. What is the equivalent of hunger in the human brain?
Pleasure.
Say it again.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Pleasure is actually not, yeah, pleasure is what follows when you eat. What is hunger? Hunger is a little painful, right?
Design.
Clothes.
Joy.
I would see those as rewards. I'll tell you the word. It's curiosity. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to say that? It's curiosity. It turns out if you make the person curious, you can absorb the information better. By the way, every parent knows this. You know to back off. You know to remind the kid later. You know how to make them curious, right? Just ignore all this. By the way, this absolutely applies to adult learning. So I'll end with open learning. So I run the office of an office at MIT called Open Learning. We're about 150 and 200 people. And we are looking at how to create online content for the world and for our students on campus. Why? The science behind it came afterwards. We did it out of instinct, right? The science came afterwards. It's very hard to do a lecture for 10 minutes, a regular lecture, because it takes 10 minutes, took 10 minutes for poor Neil to track me down and get me on this call, right? Right. But online, you can make your lectures 10 minutes. Number one. Number two, it's very hard for me to ask you questions in the lecture. Online, I can do it. In addition, when you do things online, you can fast forward, you can rewind, you can pause if you want to, have a drink of water. But in a regular lecture, it's like a freight train. If you miss it, you just blows by you. You're gone. I can do retrieval learning. I can do space retrieval. I can do interleaving, which is, Suramone. All these things. And in a lecture, I can use simulations. I can use virtual reality. I can make you curious. The future, ladies and gentlemen, is online. But remember I asked you the question in the beginning, what happens when we're back in person? Well, is there value in person? I have here Professor Tehrani, who's a very eminent architect and a teacher. Nader, could you teach design in person, in online only? And do you need to be in person?
It's a good question, and we've discovered things that we can do online that we were never able to do in the studio because of the space of inattention. The picture plane through which I'm looking at you right now turns out to be the same picture plane on which I normatively draw. And that is the topic of debate, not the nature of my face, for instance. And so we've learned things about representation online that we took for granted in person. The same is not necessarily true about other forms of speculation in model making and in the spatial realm. And hopefully that will emerge out of this discussion with you too.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you're exactly right. I'm looking for a book I want to show you, but I can't find it right now just based on what you just said. So it turns out that it's right here, actually. I want to show you this book. It's from my book. It's written by a psychologist. It's called Peak, The Science of Expertise. Right? It's an excellent book. The poor gentleman, extraordinary man, Anders Ericsson, just passed away last month. It turns out there are some things you absolutely cannot do online. This is Mr. Online saying it. And they have to do with when you get to 3D, when you get to pointing, and here's one, there's a whole emerging field called embodied cognition. It turns out when you do something with your brain, but you actually do it with the hands as well, another part of the brain wakes up. Right? Now, over time, we'll recreate it, the virtual reality, augmented reality, but it's not quite the same thing. But the most important thing is affect, the human connection, and coaching. And that's what the Speak book is about. What you can do in person that you cannot do online is if I'm learning, for example, a new art form, right? To have a professor like Nader say, no, think of it this way. To look at it from three directions and say, you should think of it this way. Or to go to a whiteboard or to point to a model and say, you have to do it this way. That's what makes in-person work. It's like parenting. Parenting in the end is in person, right? And we're beginning to understand that. So there's coaching, there's embodied cognition, which is when you do things and you engage the motor cortex of the brain. You take all that stuff. It only happens in person. Synthesis, making stuff. Competition, where you make things and you have them compete with each other, work with each other. Teamwork, collaboration. The science of this is beginning to emerge. It can only happen in person. So let me end with a tragedy and come back to COVID-19. Well, the tragedy is when we had in person before COVID, we wasted it doing the things we could do better online. And the things that we could only have done in person, we sort of did a very mediocre job of. And COVID just exposed that. So when COVID is gone, and when nature restores to us the privilege of proximity, I hope to God we do the things we couldn't have done online. So thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. Neil, back to you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. That was brilliant. I'm not sure I should have asked you for 10 minutes lecture or for a longer one, but I think there's certainly seeds of a very, very important discussion in what you said. And it's a kind of wake-up call in many ways. Maybe, I want to try and let this discussion take its own emergent direction, as it were. But can I just ask you one thing that, in many ways, you spoke about there being a kind of wake-up call. The other person who I'm sure you're familiar with, who has said that, we have a wake-up call in education is Scott Galloway. And he refers primarily to the economic model that we've been kind of pushing over the years. What are your thoughts on Professor Galloway's approach towards the economic side of education? Because clearly open learning is addressing that as well. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry. So the economics of education are difficult because, frankly, the right way to do education, as I said, the model is parenting, and parenting is not scalable, right? So we ended up neither here nor there. We're neither doing good parenting. By the way, when I say parenting, please keep in mind, even adults, when they learn, it's the same model because that's how we evolved, right? It's not scalable. So we ended up doing bad parenting. That's the model right now. So it's very expensive and often it's not very good. So Scott is right. And a bunch of colleges are going to die in America, unfortunately, in this tragedy, during this tragic period. But we can scale some of the stuff. For example, in healthcare, we're scaling it during the pandemic by using things like wearables, and your Apple Watch will have a pulse oximeter built in, right? So if you understand how things really work, you can actually figure out ways to scale them. The thing is, we didn't understand how it worked, so we made up this mishmash, which is neither here nor there. But I do think by using massive online education, flipping classrooms, and really democratizing coaching, apprenticeships, internships, things like that, I think we can have our cake and eat it too. What we can do is take a bad model or a mediocre model, right? And keep pumping money into it. And that's what we were doing. It's just not scalable. And that's what's going to happen. So I think we need to rethink our educational approach where we do coaching. We do a lot of online, very good online. We do simulations, we do internships, we do apprenticeships. And I think we can have a future which is this way, which works, gives us both what we want, but also make it affordable. By the way, the other term for all this is flipped classroom. If you heard the term flipped classroom, it's the same thing. So
let me open it up then to a discussion. And I've got a few questions, but let's see where it goes.
Can I jump in, Neil? Because first of all, Sanjay, I think that was a great introduction, and you really had our attention. So you know how to do that. That's great. But I was thinking of something which, in a way, I'm also trying to apply in some of our educational models and programs at IaaC here in Barcelona. And this has to do with the fact that we need to shift the model of top-down teaching. So the whole process that you are describing is somehow including someone that knows and someone that does not know, right? And we need to teach this person that is in a classroom and it has this pen, needs to teach these people that have a paper. And I wonder, whereas we need to shift that model, because rather than teaching people what we know, maybe what we need to do is to start thinking of how we can teach people how to learn, no? How we can offer them access to tools or platforms or formats that they can use to learn, how to find these tools to learn beyond of what we know, but also teach them how to identify, for example, distortions or false information at the moment that nothing is sure that is true in terms of knowledge and information. So how distortions can be detected, how to recognize our peers or our groups of people that we can learn from rather than waiting to learn only from one person. And of course, how to interact with these communities and grow intellectually. And that means that educators should pass from being these traditional content providers of one point towards many points that they don't know into providers of these curiosity stimulators that you were discussing, or connection sources, providers of connections that people can find in order to learn. And then, of course, educators become the responsible people to provide a background to learn how to create connections and how to learn together, rather than teaching one to the other what he or she knows. And I think that there is an interesting discussion there, because it will radically change the way, not only the way that the formats of education, but also the content of education.
I agree with you completely, actually. I think that if we can kindle curiosity, by the way, Plato said this, actually Plutarch said this, the mind is not, it is not a vessel to be filled, it's a fire to be kindled. He said that, okay? So what that means is we've known it for a few years, okay? And I completely agree with you. I think if we can, see, the thing is, if you go to YouTube right now, if you want to learn physics right now, the best place to go is to go to YouTube, let's say quantum mechanics, right? Or whatever, math, right? This is one site that I love. It's called 3 Blue, 1 Brown. Check it out. It is the most stunning explication of the material. All that's missing is the curiosity to seek it out, right? The other thing I'll say, so to your point, Areti, the amount of material out there, we can mop it up. We can just absorb it. If we can provide a structure of curiosity, if you will, a pathway, right? The other thing I'll say is that in the gig economy, and companies aren't shrinking now, they aren't growing now, they're shrinking. More and more people will be self-employed. More and more people are going to be freelancers. They're going to have to become the CEOs and chief learning officers and chief marketing officers of their own lives, right? They aren't going to be spoon-fed. They have to survive. And we need to teach them how to nourish that. And so to your point, I think we need to become what we always were, which is learning animals, And it's a sort of a change in locus, to your point. I completely agree with that, actually. And that's why I feel that teachers have to think of themselves as coaches rather than providers of knowledge, because trust me, there are other ways to get the knowledge.
Sanjay, may I prompt a question, please? It's a slightly running lateral to the discussion we're having today, but one of the things that really interests me, and over the discussions that you and I have had over the years, is the prospect of online learning democratizing education, expanding in what was then our MIT model and now is really a global phenomenon. But in this period also, we've also seen the ways in which the hierarchies of education delivery, top down, filtered for ideological reasons and reasons of power, has also become horizontalized. And by doing that also, the kind of access that we have to information and knowledge is also paired up with our access to produce knowledge and alternative forms of truth. And so now I'm going to that other form of dilemma that we're all facing now, and the inability to clearly decipher between what is new forms of knowledge and new forms of spin, new mythologies, new disinformation. And how do you begin to position a new way of overseeing scholarship in this environment? Because it's a very interesting and crisis that we're facing in tandem with the other kinds of things that we're facing.
That's a great question, Nader. And yes, no, absolutely. It's become more horizontal. I mean, 3 Blue, 1 Brown is a guy, okay? He used to work at Khan Academy. He's a Stanford grad, Sanders, and he produces great content. Sal Khan is a person, right? Vihart is this lady, produces amazing content, but they're not known. They're not at some institution, right? They're very accomplished people, but they're in their own worlds. And yet there are channels where you can get all these conspiracy theories. This is, to me, a sort of an existential instinct that we all need to develop, which is, when we taste something, if it tastes bitter, it's probably because the body, human beings figured out that's not something we should be eating, right? Our taste buds are sort of evolved to separate out good stuff from bad stuff. We need to develop a sixth sense for knowledge. We can't just be knowledge consumers. There's something called computational thinking. I think if you generalize it, I feel we need to have an antenna where we can sift and cross-triangulate and cross-check and cross-reference and look for, sort of a provenance of the information. And what's happened, and actually one of my colleagues here at MIT, a grad student at MIT, Nabil Gilani, and his group wrote a very interesting paper on these microcosms of truth, where people live in their own little bubbles and everything is self-consistent, but they're drifting, in a sea, untethered to any or undirected by any sort of navigational system. So we absolutely, I think, existentially need to develop that to survive. Otherwise, we're all adrift. So I don't have an answer to your question, but I do think, I actually feel that it can be developed. We just need to work on it. I can tell you, my 18-year-old is pretty good, she's pretty good at figuring out what's real and what's not. Of course, she did grow up in an educated family. And the problem is that advantage she has is not an advantage a lot of other equally bright children will have. And so we have to somehow democratize the meta knowledge more than the knowledge itself, perhaps.
Maybe as a follow-up question is, if they're just crudely speaking, if there's two educational models, one where you learn things, but the other where you're not focusing on things, but rather on critical sensibilities that enable you to discern between this and that. How is it that the online format may radicalize critical sensibilities or different ways of probing or learning, as Areti put it?
Yeah, because when you're in a classroom at MIT, you have guardrails. You have things to tell you that doesn't work. Don't believe in a perpetual motion machine. The physics don't work. The problem in the virtual world is you have no guardrails, and you're foraging, and then we fall prey to confirmation bias. If I have a bias, if I don't like certain kind of people, and it starts feeding my confirmation bias. And that's the comment someone made earlier about pleasure and joy. I mean, we know how our joy centers and pleasure centers work. We know how, our reward systems work, the limbic system, et cetera, and you can easily get derailed. So that is a sort of an inner discipline that we need to teach as much as knowledge, and a North Star to guide. I don't have an answer, but I do think it's existential at this point. And by the way, I think coronavirus has completely taken advantage of this breakdown in humanity, right? It's taken advantage of social proximity and taken advantage of the fact it's literally hacked us, right? Because all you have to do is agree. And it knows we're not agreeing right now and just took advantage of that. So, sorry, someone else. Sorry, I think Areti had a question. Sorry. Oh, Sarita, yeah.
I have a question for actually all the other three panelists. There's an architect in India, his name is Prem Chandavarkar, and he said something very interesting. He said, learning is not most on-ground universities, especially in India, we assume that learning is an automatic byproduct of instruction. I've been observing so many online classes that are going on in architecture and other fields for children. The assumption that if we use Zoom to communicate a lecture, that becomes learning. But actually what happens in online, the power is with the student. The greatest, at least that's what we feel, that when a student is online, they have the ability to go, it's so transparent, they can go to so many avenues to get that education. And therefore, if I'm engaging in an activity to teach you, I have to add that, one plus, right? Do you all think that right now institutions are really leveraging the medium of online, not just communicating a lecture? Because in India, I can tell you specifically, in many colleges, faculties don't know how to leverage it. They're just communicating it. They're just using a medium to do an on-ground lecture online. And is that short selling the medium? And is that, do you all know of some excellent examples of, because you have to co-create with students, right? Online, there's a great possibility to do that. There's a great possibility to use tools which are, which faculty don't know sometimes, especially in architecture and design. So do you all see that as an issue, or is it happening there more than it's happening here?
Could I just chip in there to sort of follow up from that? I mean, I think the idea of co-creating, or let's say co-learning, I had an experience about 2 weeks ago when I started teaching a lecture course that has 110 students at FIU, Florida International University. And at one point, one of my students kind of, as it were, sort of jumped in with a question. And we began to realize that the lecture as such wasn't making much sense. And what was developing was a kind of like almost like a 110-person seminar room. And the student followed up by saying, well, I feel that I'm in the front row of this lecture theatre. And so we've kind of abandoned, I don't know if this is the right approach or not, we've kind of abandoned the idea of certainly of a monologue of one person just distributing the information and trying to work together. And it's so far been a very special experience. I'm wondering what Sanjay would recommend as the ideal format, whether, just to pick up on that idea of co-learning, which I think is a very beautiful idea. I'd also just want to add one final thing, and that is when I was a student at the University of Cambridge, I was very fortunate to be taught by the late, great Catherine Cook, who was a specialist on Russian constructivism. And up until the moment when she came and taught me, my history theory classes, I was kind of, I guess, mildly switched off. But she just brought this incredibly infectious enthusiasm to the whole debate. And it wasn't the content so much, it was the infectious enthusiasm that kind of carried us all along with it. So anyway, Sanjay, I just want to ask that question about whether the seminar makes a better kind of format than the kind of the lecture as such.
Well, I mean, I think in Zoom, we have no other way. I think we should go to asynchronous videos, put the content, use an iPhone, right? I recorded a whole 35 lecture video course on an iPhone over this last few months. And then I think the Zoom has to be a seminar, a discussion. In fact, Zoom is very good as a discussion forum because everyone's in the front seat, right? As you said, there is no backseater. Co-creation is a little bit more difficult, but my colleagues have done some crazy and amazing and a little bit insane things. I mean, I have pictures of colleagues with oscilloscopes on their kitchen tables, and we shipped out kits. Fadil Adib, one of my colleagues, shipped out cell phones and kits, and students did projects at home and they'd show them on their Zoom screens. At the end of the semester, he said he had better projects during the crisis than he has in person. I mean, you can do some magic here, right? I think Sarita's question is just right. I mean, I do think that we owe it in these weird times to co-create, but also we have a crisis that we shouldn't waste, In other words, in its own weird way, I mean, hopefully it won't last much longer. It's galvanized in different ways, to be more sort of given us more agency, I suppose, because it's been taken away elsewhere. I do think this has to be done today.
To me, there is an interesting fact that all this crisis has brought, and it is, of course, the virtual, the digital, and the online learning. No, although I have to be honest that I totally agree that not everything could be taught online, and totally online education is not one that, in my opinion, could be considered complete or holistic. But I think that this familiarization with the online learning processes, especially the asynchronous ones, the ones that you can sit down and listen and learn when you can, I think it transforms learning and it somehow takes it out from a traditional point of view that education has a specific timeline, it fits on a specific age of somebody, and then it takes it totally out into an open, let's say, a timeline where it almost becomes a lifestyle, it becomes a way of life. No, I can keep on learning as I grow up, and I need to quote here Salonas, just because I am Greek, and he was saying, "Girasko aidi daskomenos." I'm sorry for my Greek. It means I grow old ever learning many things. And through making laws, because he was a poet and lawmaker, he was trying to explain how the education or the learning has no aids or has no, let's say, a linear process. And I think this is something that the crisis brought to us to education. We are more familiar with the online. This starts to become a lifestyle, and I'm really, really happy about this. On the other hand, it is true that especially some of the work that we're doing in relation, I mean, one of our, for example, lemmas on our educational and pedagogical model is learning out of making, no? So you said it as well in the beginning, that hands, making things or gestures or being part of a process is something that makes you learn better, right? So this, we cannot discard it. And this made me think during this process, during this lockdown, it made me think of what kind of alternatives we can bring, or hybrids. And I think that there is an interesting possibility there of offering virtual classrooms, offering accessible, more equal, more just, more democratized educational models beyond physical proximity, and have people distributed around the world, but then have an amazing collaboration among universities, among making places, fabrication, fab labs, fabrication, manufacturing factories and facilities. And then those people from wherever they are, they could actually go and use these facilities. So yes, being connected beyond physical proximity, but not discarding the process of learning out of making, the process of learning out of failuring, etc. In Barcelona for years now, we have this at IaaC, this program of Fab Academy that is actually started from the Center for Bits and Atoms at the MIT. And this is a distributed program where different fab labs around the world, they are connected and they are receiving students locally, fabricating locally, but being connected globally, you know? And I think that this distributed educational model that does not discard the making and the prototyping and the learning out of making, it is the future. And that requires that unique collaboration among schools, among universities, among industries and academies, etc., etc.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's like a coffee shop. Maker shops should be like coffee shops. You go in to make stuff, right? I just put a link to one of my colleagues, Bjorn Poonen, who's with me at UC Berkeley, he's a professor of math at MIT. He was telling me the other day that I think in a conference, and they were doing like a research seminar, and they had to do it on Zoom. And they thought, why are we only inviting MIT people? Just throw it open to the world.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes, and I was actually just coming to that because, you know, just the other day, I received 5 invites on the same topic on architecture. And I was thinking, why didn't those 5 people collaborate online? And, you know, if I'm a student of a particular college, why do I have to listen to my faculty only? Because if you have to really harness the power of online, it by definition should just open up. Because, you know, I think one of the things about online is that, the way we feel education will get democratized online is that it can be customized. So as a student, I can almost like I can customize. I should be able to choose, you know, the faculty I want, the workshops I want to attend. So then what is the role of a physical institute? And do they become just these places where people come for workshops? And, you know, that is utopia. I mean, you know, if minds can move like that, it would be just phenomenal, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you take what you just said, Sarita, with what Areti just said, you live in a pool, infinite pool of knowledge and content. And when you want to make, you find the maker place. You know, then what happens is that there are places where certain experts collaborate and so on. You know, by the way, if you look at the Renaissance Europe, you know, and, you know, Michelangelo probably never attended a lecture, right? But he went from shop to shop. If you look at in Sarita in India, if you look at the gharanas where the musicians string, a gharana is like a local sort of a, how would you say it, an academy, right? From one particular group. You go from gharana to gharana and you learn. I mean, this is the future. I mean, it's, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. And this COVID has given us a lot of necessity, right? So.
But this prompts another discussion about the nature of the canons. And I say that because in architecture, if you look at it practically, now we don't need to travel, and people don't need to travel thousands of miles to just give one lecture. You can have them in your classrooms. But more interestingly, the kind of challenge to politics and current institutions through Black Lives Matter these days has opened up a discussion about the decolonization of education entirely. And one of the problems that we have had in our school at Cooper Union is that we have some great scholars, but they're scholars of the Western canon. And when asked to open up and engage in precedents, in canons, and in modalities of thinking that are not germane to their own research, they're unable to do that. And this horizontal model of absorbing other minds is beginning to challenge our very, the very way that our union works, because the union is there to protect the faculty. But if you begin to think of a more international union in which you can absorb other voices, it would suggest a very different organization of institutions.
Yeah, there is the Nobel laureates, Hubel and Wiesel, I think it's them. They did an experiment where they raise kittens in a room, if I recall, I may, don't quote me on this, but in a room with vertical stripes. And then when they release them into the wild, the kittens cannot jump onto tables because they're horizontal. This is us,
I have a very, I don't know whether it's politically correct to say that in this forum, but I feel the biggest resistance in online is from the institution and the faculty. Because when I look at the student, and we work with a lot of students, right? So they are in this incredible, in this very not so desirable state, because here they have the power to learn so much online from really amazing faculty online. And then they go, and I can tell you in colleges, out of the 600 architecture colleges, I can count on one hand the good architecture schools. So in the 595 colleges, they have to work within that system. It is, I feel that, the student wants to have that freedom to be able to assimilate knowledge online and then use that network offline. But I think there's so much resistance in faculty and so much resistance because the model of education, the commercial model of education will get completely haywire if this, if students start to adopt this, right? So, I don't think a university ever will give you a degree if you just, there wouldn't be a value. The market increasingly seeing that, in gaming or in other professions, there is a value to that. But in architecture, there's so much resistance. I think Duo Dickinson called it what? He called it the deep state of architecture. So, yeah.
Yeah, the ruts hopefully wash away. I do think, though, in defense of great institutions, the great institutions, what they do is they provide fertile grounds for making, experimenting, connecting. I think the most important classroom at MIT is the coffee shop in Lobby 7, which used to be under Nader's office, actually, right? And that coffee shop is where the sparks fly, the connections are made. I've always said, the Nobel laureate, talks to the undergraduate student and the lady who works in the coffee shop, and something amazing happens, right? So there is something to be said for that. The challenge, I think, is, I think this is, look at YouTube, right? YouTube has really democratized creativity. It's in the education space, it's really democratized the content. Honestly, if you look at some YouTube physics lectures, right? And I look at my lectures in dynamics, which is a topic in physics, it really ups the game for me, right? So it's a job threat to me. So I better be really good at coaching, which is the one thing I can probably do and keep my job. So.
Yeah, Sanjay, there's this whole talk about, how many professions are going to get redundant in a few years and how many more professions are getting added in, right? So do you think, we feel that youngsters, as we go along, they are, in our generation, that degree was everything, from a degree from an Ivy League, or, we coveted that, right? But youngsters, they are interested in learning so many things, and there is an increasing tendency not to kind of look at a career as a lifelong thing. So they want to do so many things, and they're not really concerned with, whether they're getting the degree or not getting the degree, right? Do you think that has a bearing in how y'all, do you think that, as somebody, all three of y'all, you run amazing institutions. Do you think that there is a threat that going forward, a lot of youngsters may not want to be, college degree holders in a sense, because again, in the entertainment space or in the gaming industry or in allied creative fields, they are doing excellently. They're doing excellently. They learn, and even the market is kind of adjusting. Do you think that, do you foresee that happening in architecture or, in allied fields of education at MIT?
Well, I'll speak very quickly, but I would love to hear Areti and Nader's comments on this. Look, it's sort of strange that, let's say your degree requires 200 credits. You get 195. We say, you're a dropout, you're a failure. You didn't get your degree. Too bad, right? But you get 200. Oh my God, you're a success. You have an Ivy League degree, whatever. I mean, what is that? What is this brittle monolith, right? So clearly the future has to be much more granular, where your degree is actually a series of achievements. Now, it is true that some achievements have to come together, like in architecture, you need a foundation. But beyond that, so my view is that we will have much more stackable, much more granular credentials. And students will be able to craft their own path, to the point where MIT, Harvard, and a bunch of us, we started it. We're creating a blockchain-based transcript, basically, where you can layer your achievements, and it's your LinkedIn page. That's your transcript, not this thing that MIT gives you or doesn't give you if you don't graduate, the degree. So I absolutely, Sarita, feel that it's going to be much more granular. I don't know what Nader and Areti think of that, but that's my view.
Yeah, if I may add to that, especially coming from a place that we are not officially a university, right? We're a non-profit foundation. So our degrees are professional degrees, and they are accredited by the Public Polytechnic School. But as an entity, we're not an entity that issues degrees. And every time more and more, I see the tendency of students and professionals coming to IaaC for the skills and the experience, the experience of managing to see architecture and our discipline from a different perspective, like we always call them, we never call them students, actually, we call them change makers, because that's what we want them to be. And that is something that goes beyond any degree. And many people are every time more and more interested into the skills and the experience rather than the final degree. And I know that because we have a lot of people also interested and following programs that they are not even having degrees which are accredited by the Public Polytechnic School. So I think that this is an interesting shift. It's an interesting shift also in terms of how do we measure our impact, like it's not like how many degrees you have or how many citations you have or how many research papers you have published. Is really about how your work has been relevant to people that they are outside of your field, to people that they are really consuming, quote to quote, or using what you are producing and designing. So I'm saying that because usually we are in the same circles of people working with digital architecture and manufacturing. And sometimes it seems that our work stays within our laboratories and it very little go outside to impact society, We don't have administrations collaborating with us. We don't have projects that they are really make a change in the outside world. So I think that this is something that is definitely changing. We are trying to integrate that into our pedagogical model so that students are not just studying a master's or a PhD, but they are part of European research-funded projects, of pilot projects. So they come to collaborate from that educational, let's say, platform with people that they are taking decisions, with people that they are making regulations, with people that they are eventually running the industry. And that is much more valuable than any degree, in my opinion. It's exactly also what the market is searching. No, it doesn't care so much anymore about the degrees, but rather the skills of the people to contribute to a more innovative way of thinking, different processes, and of course contributing to thinking out of the box. No, like I think that is fundamental.
It's funny, my shift from MIT to Cooper has prompted me to also wear a slightly different hat. Whereas in MIT, the dominant program in architecture was a master's. At Cooper Union, it's an undergraduate degree, and therefore beholden to all of the NAAB requirements and all of the bells and whistles of bureaucracy. And yet, not unlike what I used to say at MIT, I continue to say this at Cooper, even with more energy, that we don't actually prepare students for the profession as such. The profession is evolving so rapidly, you need to prepare the students for the uncertainties and the improvisations that need to happen, and give them confidence and dexterity to play rather than to end up with a product in their minds. So this is a very important quality, because it also imagines that after their graduation, whether they go into a profession or not, they may also take off-ramps into the arts, into the engineering, or other forms of research outside of the classical practice that has been predefined by generations past of what architecture means.
Isn't it strange that we tell our students, imagine if we said to our students, work out for 4 years of your life and you'll be fit for the rest of your life. Trust me, take my word for it. That's what a degree is. Right? But we know you got to go to the gym, 3 times a week or whatever you do, whatever 4 times a week, right? Build your core strength. Yes, you need to do a few years of that. I mean, it's by the way, I mean, it's one of the best things you can do at MIT and Harvard, apparently, is drop out, because that's how you become a billionaire. So my point is that, yeah, I mean, I believe in the undergraduate degree. I'd very much want my kid to get an undergraduate degree because it's foundational, but she should be able to drop out after 3 years, do a startup, come back and finish. We make it so difficult,
Just adding to what Nader just said, I was reading something what Rahul Mehrotra said, and he said that we teach in architecture to build for the absolute when the whole world is transitioning, and I think that is going to be the biggest challenge of it, and that's one of the reasons architecture students, they are at when they get out of college, they are neither the college is equipping them to really get into the commercial practice and build a career. There is no long-term career there for them. In India, almost 70% of architects who graduate, there are no placements. And this is, the dichotomy is we are a country that needs many architects, and yet the relevance of architects are just falling by the day. So it's very interesting to know, I mean, what is the role of education here? It boggles my mind when I look at these children, and it's their entire career, and they are moving into professions which are allied fields maybe, but more out of compulsion, and not because there's no demand. They just don't have the skill sets as yet, and then the pandemic, and then the uncertainty. So it's a very interesting time to look at how they will negotiate all of this, and what is the role of faculty, and what is the role of mentoring and coaching and all of that to make them relevant. To make them relevant. Sorry, am I sounding very depressive? Sorry, I didn't mean.
Can I ask you what you think? Ask you a question. I mean, your discipline. I understand you trained as a lawyer initially.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I love all of you.
Yes, I know. What is interesting, the difference certainly in my country, the UK, between law and architecture is that law as an academic discipline is not constrained by the profession of law. You do it's almost like a intellectual course, and then you do a kind of add-on extra professional training qualification. Whereas in architecture, we have a very different model whereby, and it's a kind of very difficult model actually, that the professional organizations are monitoring and controlling and vetting the education that's going on in the academia. Which, having seen both in operation, which one do you prefer?
Architecture.
But so you think there should be this very close engagement with the professions?
I just feel, as a complete outsider in this discussion, I just feel, you know, and I'm speaking strictly from the Indian context because that's what I've seen up close and personal. I just feel the curriculum in architecture, you know, the building industry is one thing that changes really quickly. You know, with technology, I just feel architecture education does not keep pace, and not because they can't, because they don't want to. And that's why I reread that duo. You all must read that article. I'm going to forward it to all of you all, where he talks about the fact that it's called a deep state. He's, you know, people who are the architects, so to speak. They don't want this model to change, you know, and I think that's a travesty, because the collaborative model, the model of technology can be a huge partner to architecture education. The industry, the building industry can be a huge partner, but the education system in India does not allow either. They don't allow either to get in really, you know, because that also means that the faculty has to be continuously learning, you know, and that's challenging here, you know, and but yeah, I'm like I said, I'm biased towards architecture. I'm here by choice. I mean, most in India don't engage with architecture by choice. So,
but your comments, Sarita, bite deep into the architect's Achilles heel, because you also obviously know something about us. On the one hand, we're fueled by two kinds of mythologies. One, the first is the myth of the architect as genius, the star, the lone hero. And the other one is the architect who wants to be relevant and is socially engaged. The problem often is that these are false dichotomies. To be socially engaged is not necessarily an abandonment of the innate skills that have to do with representation, with data visualization, with modeling, and with forecasting. All of those things that other fields don't do, but that we can communicate in a certain way and in innovative ways. And of course, to be an inventive individual does not preclude the collaborative process that is the underlying force of great practices. And so these myths have to be overturned in order for us to be relevant, not just to each other, but rather to Washington, D.C., to the state, to the city, and to governance, actually.
Yeah. In India, the 600 colleges teach students to build architecture that is a Western construct. And India, every 200 kilometers is different. You know, there is an entire resurgence of demand in the rural sector, but you don't have architects wanting to work there. There's a huge demand for architecture there, not in the conventional, obviously it'll pay less, but the quantum of work is there, right? And the ability to make an impact is there. So I just think the colleges don't align with that. They don't show the opportunity to the youngster to move into a place like that, or equip them with the skills for that. So yeah, I think architects should take architecture seriously and not themselves so much. My God, are y'all going to hate me now?
You could say that to every academic, by the way.
No, but I really love architects. Neil will tell you that. I mean, I think I was telling an architect colleague of mine that, the pandemic has clearly shown that every single solution going forward technically is a design solution. When we say social distancing, when we look at, when we look at buildings that are healthier, that make you healthier. You know, everything is a spatial solution. That's how powerful you are. You know, I think it's incredible. I think you are incredible.
Can I pick up on another small aspect of what I want to go back to, in a way, to Scott Galloway, not to him himself, but rather to more of the kind of economic model. Because, I mean, at the moment, we're suddenly discovering, I mean, Sanjay put a comment online saying no conference room has walls anymore, which is exactly what we kind of came across in Digital Futures world. We felt we'd broken through the walls of the classroom and managed to kind of democratize things in many ways. But in some ways, the problem of Digital Futures world is that it depends upon the generosity of an amazing team. I mean, we're very lucky that everybody gave their time pro bono for free. And it was an astonishing moment of solidarity where the entire kind of academic community came together for people across the world. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment. But it depended in some sense on piggybacking, as it were, on the back of academic institutions. And it's as indeed does open learning. I mean, open learning can exist financially because of MIT itself. And so there is a kind of a bigger sort of kind of financial question down the road. We'd all love to have to treat education as a right to make it available for free all over the place, as indeed kind of happens in Germany. But in many situations, it's not possible from an economic point of view. We simply can't survive that way. So I want to just throw that out as a kind of question. Are we going to have to rethink the model of that? Or how can we, is it just a temporary moment that we're benefiting from this and we're allowed to piggyback on the existing structure? But how could we survive without the places like MIT, which are charging students and so on?
I'll just say for MIT, MIT is not tuition driven. It's just, you know, we're very fortunate. We have a relatively large endowment, right? Something north of almost $20 billion. And it's essentially a foundation that, you know, our admissions is needs blind. In other words, if a student gets in, we don't care whether they can pay or not, we'll make it work. So, and around the world, there are many foundations. And I do think these foundations can seed this. I do think, however, that and I also feel that the economics of education will and can change. Khan did it because he was tutoring his niece, right? Sal Khan did it. You know, Grant Sanderson, who does 3 Blue, 1 Brown, he used to work at Khan Academy. He's a Stanford grad. He went to work at Khan Academy, and then he created this thing. And he gets paid on Patreon and a few sponsorships, right? It's the pleasure of creating. The whole open source movement survives on that, actually. And I also want to separate knowledge creation from knowledge explication, for the lack of a better term. All right, knowledge creation is expensive. It's big labs, it's people theorizing and thinking. It's not necessarily expensive, but it can be expensive, especially big science. Then I think explication is eminently democratizable. And the revenue model can be democratized as well, right? You know, it's like what eBay does. Even Amazon, for example, we think of Amazon as this behemoth, but what Amazon does is it's empowered a bunch of small vendors as well. 60% of the revenues, I think, are the affiliates, you know, or eBay, for example, you know, it's that mom and pop who sell, you know, packaging material that you want to buy and you get it cheap, right? Because they've figured out where to buy the excess capacity. I do think there is a new quiescence, a new equilibrium that maybe I'm being idealistic. I do think there is an equilibrium. MIT's role, though, is to seed that and enable it, which is open source software comes from MIT, GNU, right? Started here. So we will initiate it. But our fundamental role is we're a research institution. And even in this talk, I talked about some of the work we're doing in the science of learning, the research into sharing and open education resources. But I do think there is a self-sustaining equilibrium possible.
From a more granular perspective, and I agree with everything you've said, But what we discovered last semester, towards the end of the last semester, when we went online, institutionally speaking, not casually, is that there was the immediate debate of whether the students are getting their money's worth of education now that they've been shifted online. And strangely, we were also faced with a predicament that was almost unsurmountable, because it's not that the faculty members were working less because they were online, quite the opposite. They were working many more hours with much more individuated attention to smaller student groups along the way. So there is clearly the necessity for a paradigm shift if we're going to look at the different scales at which educational economies are going to be evaluated.
Just want to add to, I mean, I totally agree with Nader. It has been exhaustive and we know it all, the ones that we have been involved in online teaching. And I do agree that we need to rethink the different scales of the economies that they are involved in education. No? I think that Sanjay has highlighted the fact that there could be an investment from few. No, it is a bit what happened also, Neil, in the Digital Futures. You know, like few instructors gave their time for free. But I think that we also need to start thinking differently in terms of which are the tools that we're using. You know, like at some moment we were discussing about blockchain. No? Blockchain technology is based on not only on let's say transparent transactions, but it's also based on a model of tokenization, which means that there is an exchange of services without necessarily a kind of monetary interchange. And I think that this could be also something very interesting when we are talking about faculty or experts, that they could explain this knowledge and not generate it. I totally agree that generation of knowledge, it's something much more complex. And then we shouldn't also forget that we live in the age of participation, in the age of open source. A lot of research work can be found online for free, from academia to Commoncat to the GitHub platforms. We can find a lot of things there. And because we live in this participation age of people consuming, let's say, this knowledge, then they also want to contribute. And we usually say at IaaC that if you need 1 million euros, today it's easier to find 1 million people that would give you €1 each, rather than finding one person that would give you 1 million euros all of itself. And I'm saying that just to highlight, let's say, the power also of the collective, the power of the individuals, that they are within these open source communities, and how this could become also another alternative model of supporting some of these open learning initiatives.
I'm just wondering, whether we shouldn't open it up to some more questions from outside. We have some of our committee online who have got some questions to ask, and also there'll be some questions coming from Bilibili and YouTube. So maybe somebody could forward some of those questions from the live stream, and maybe I could invite a few of our committee to ask questions. Marina, you had a question?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I totally agree with Sarita and Areti comment, for example, about that the problem is not how we teach. I'm an educator from Argentina as well. I'm an architect. I'm from the Public University in Buenos Aires, in La Plata. But I believe that that you say, Areti, about that we need to think about how we learn, not about how we teach. Because there is a question that I have for Sanjay. Sanjay said something about competition, and I think I have some I don't know, interest of it, because I have my point of view. Maybe it's a little bit controversial, but I don't believe in competition to learn, because our work today is ruled by competition. I mean, we compete for a scholarship. I've been rejected for several scholarships sometimes, and we sometimes the system that we use during the class is based on competition. Who is the best? No, who has the A's, and who got all the A's. And I suppose that for you, as a teacher, I suppose that you want to put all A's. You don't want to put C or D's or anything to your students. You want to make all of them great professionals. And so I'm a little bit skeptical about competition. Maybe this is part of the normalization that we have in our educational system today. This is something that yes, virtual classes can change this. Idea that with internet, I mean, I posted a comment about this, but the internet is 31 years old and it's not as democratic as we thought it will be. Today, publishers have taken to the court, to Internet Archive, to Open Library, who given us to people that don't have the possibility to buy all the books, for example, to get access to it. And maybe it's part of the competitive system as well, because it's part of this idea that the knowledge is not shareable, it's not as utopical. I mean, it's not so utopian as we think that we share everything with everyone. But I believe that this is going to be the knowledge bigger and better for us if we collaborate, really collaborate between each other. So this is my argument against the competition. I mean, I love US Open. I follow all the matches and I really like it. But I don't know if it's the same in a scheme of learning more than teaching.
So I think that's a good question. Let me defend competition first, and then I'll actually agree with you in most part. You know, if you are making a computer and you're in the marketplace, then the lowest power, by the way, the new Apple Watch and the new the iPad Air will be released likely in 4 days. So if you've designed the chip for it, you want the best chip because the battery lasts the longest, et cetera, et cetera. At MIT, we have a competition where students design robots and then they compete with each other. And actually, that's a very good learning experience because they can see, oh, that person, maybe by mistake, did this, and that's why that robot did better. So I wouldn't throw competition out of the window because we do compete. I mean, the capitalistic system is one of competition. We do want the best product. We don't want the mediocre product. So I don't think we should throw it out of the window. The challenge, I think, is a lot of our competition is unfair. A lot of our competition is artificial. It's not authentic, right? We're not actually checking the thing that really matters. We're checking the other thing. You know, for example, in the US, you have the SATs. And, you know, in the English SAT, frankly, they're checking if your parents know English. That should not be, you know, it's not how well you write. It's not checking that, right? In my book, I talk about, you know, a few years ago when my daughter was preparing for the SAT, she said, Daddy, what's a regatta? And I said, why the hell do you need to know what a regatta is? It's a secret handshake. Do your parents know what a regatta is? That's really what the secret handshake is. Were you told during your childhood what a regatta was? That should not be competition. So I think, but at the same time, there is a recognition of excellence. I think we need to separate the recognition of excellence from proxies, which are unfair, which are diminishing, which are, you know, discriminating, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't throw competition entirely out of the window. That's my point.
Yes, but who defines the excellence? That's the problem.
Well, that's the problem, right? That's exactly right. I mean, that's why. So, in fact, the whole point of my book is I talk about we have taken this business of competition and selection. The word is winnowing, and we've built a whole educational system around that. And in the process, we've lost what it really means. So I agree with you. That's what I'm saying. I'm actually agreeing with you that we need to come up with authentic measures, right? And there are ways to do it in certain fields. It's no easy answer. All I'm saying is I wouldn't throw competition, that word, out the window. That's my point.
Yes, because maybe we can go to excellence, helping each other, not compete each other. So you can compete with yourself if you want. You want to be better, so you learn, so you study, so you want to be better to make something good for the world, if you want to say. But this is my idea, that if this spirit of solidarity, different, I mean, you work with your mate, you don't have to compete with your mate, you don't want to be better to your, you are not competing with your mate, you are trying to help him or to help her, I don't know, to do a better thing. So you give what you know, the other is going to tell you what he knows or she knows, and you are going to build something together. And in that way, I think that maybe we can do better things than if we compete each other. That's
I love that. I love that. I hope we can do more of that. But in the end, though, when you're a freelancer and you want to get that job, you are competing. That's what I mean. You know what I mean?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you, but I mean, you don't want to take away that unfortunate fact of life, which is whichever system you're in, someone's going to go get the contract, right? That's my point.
Yep. Yeah, I understand.
I don't know if I may, but I would like to ask a question too. So I think what I see, and thank you all for your contribution. It's really inspiring. I think the challenge will be that it will become more important to accept the feeling of awe and kind of being astonished about something. And I think a lot of us in society in general kind of struggle with that because it's so closely related to the feeling of fear. But I think it is very crucial to learn to be curious in this world. So just like running is controlled falling in some way, I think learning is some kind of controlled risk-taking. And as Nader pointed out, it's crucial to acquire critical sensibility. So I think this will take kind of a bigger social shift. And I know it's a large endeavor, but I think, educators take a part in that. And so my question is, how do you think as educators, we all can help contribute to a shift in society that kind of goes towards a more curiosity driven, exposure to the world and, as a community, kind of also in line with what Marina said earlier. So that's my question.
Nader, Areti, maybe Neil?
I'll give one answer, but it's one of many. I mean, the simple inversion of classrooms to get students to start teaching them, and at best for us to turn into either, I don't know, moderators or students or people engaging them is one way to do it. And it may be that there are gaps in the content, but they actually get filled in by other students, and the kind of incremental knowledge that gets built up, I have found in the first years, makes them extraordinary individuals by year 3. This is in a 5-year program. I've seen this transformation at Cooper in the last few years. And this shift in this kind of inverted model has been extraordinary for me anyway. And I've learned a lot.
I just want to throw out another idea kind of related to this. And that is that maybe the terminology that we're using needs to be kind of revisited because we use the terms for so long. I have a problem in a way with the term professor, because a professor is someone who professes, who kind of claims to have a certain knowledge in a certain way. And that's been called into question now because no longer does the one person stand, well, it's no longer standing in front of the auditorium, but in the Zoom, conducting the Zoom class, no longer is it that person who holds all the secrets. We can now go online. There are any number of TED Talks, there are any number of YouTube discussions and so on from Digital Futures and so on where we can access knowledge. And I'm wondering whether we need to think about the different terminology for how we describe those people. As someone who has a background in Latin, educate means, the term educator means to lead out. And I wonder whether that isn't the idea of being some kind of curator or leader or a kind of catalyst, or less the idea of simply kind of transposing knowledge and more an idea of kind of being some kind of someone on a journey with the student, shall we say?
Yeah, well, following this game of words, maybe I will repeat some of the things that I said in the beginning, which is like this idea of passing from the content provider to a curiosity simulator, to a connector. I think that this is very important. And there's one more point that I was thinking during your question, and that is the fact that I believe that we also need to be able to create common goals and common objectives within the groups of the people that we are learning with, together with them, no? And this becomes very fundamental, because we are at a moment that it's not anymore about making the more complex, beautiful, digitally, let's say, unique design. We're at the moment that we need to find solutions to certain challenges and to numerous crises that we are facing today. So that requires, like collaboration, not only with architects and together with architects, but it also requires collaboration with different disciplines. And once you set up these common objectives towards solutions for climate change, for equality, for accessibility, for resiliency, then you start creating, you give incentives to students to start thinking of how they can collaborate or bring knowledge from other disciplines such as biology or social sciences or data science, and then create a team that is not competing maybe to connect with the question of Marina, but they are all working towards a common goal. And I think that this is where we naturally go, this is where we should go, because I do agree that the idea of star architect is dying, and is dying because there is a need of architecture to become more collaborative and more socially driven, more driven by the crisis and the challenges that our society is facing. And it was great to be able to experiment for a couple of decades with the new tools and the new technologies. Now we need to put these technologies serve the society. And that is a common objective that could bring people together, whereas those people are students or learners, or they are teachers, professors, educators, communicators, etc.
Yeah, maybe.
Go ahead.
So I think it is really interesting to see how this accessibility is making learning more democratized. And I do believe that we are getting better and better in the way we can learn how to hear and how to see. But I see that there is a vacuum in doing things. Like if you go back to this saying that when I hear something, I forget. When I see something, I remember, and when I do something, I understand. So how do we sort of fill this vacuum? Because yes, this new let's say situation or circumstances that we are living in is making education more accessible when it comes to hearing or seeing, but when it comes to doing things, I think there is a huge vacuum. Somehow Areti mentioned this idea of distributed centers where we can do things and make things. But how do we fill this vacuum? I would like to maybe hear what's Sanjay think about this vacuum that we sort of witness now.
Well, this is the golden age of doing. I mean, for the first time in history, you can make anything you want, 3D print it. You can create a website in a day, literally. You can start a retail store instantly. You can ship instantly. You can build a circuit. You can use a FPGA. You can do a Arduino, a Raspberry Pi. This is in my fields, right? It's unbelievable. You might be able to cobble together a programmer in Pakistan to write code, firmware for your thing. You might get someone to design a logo. What's interesting, of course, I mean, that's not the same for architecture, it's not easy, but even there, to Sarita's point, if you look a little bit beyond the sort of the Taj Mahal projects, right? The Taj Mahal project is but if you look just a little bit outside, there's so many opportunities. And actually Areti talked about the Fab Labs, right? I mean, I think if we want to reinvent education, this is where governments and thinkers and philanthropists can make a contribution. Let's put it in the fingertips. It's there. Our inability to do it is not because of inability of it's not lack of capability, it's lack of intention, I think.
But what I think is missing is this spontaneous, let's say, gathering and co-creation that somehow is really important when it comes to building things. So I understand that this distributed model of Fab Labs and Maker movement is somehow filling this vacuum. But when it comes to educational models, I wonder if these distributed systems are fully accessible, especially in areas that we don't have technology. Like if you think of this open learning, there are some areas that are still don't have full access to internet, right?
Oh, so, yeah. No doubt. I mean, right. In fact, open learning can actually make the divide even worse, because when things went online, the kids with internet access had a huge advantage of the kids who didn't, right? So no doubt about it. I mean, I feel we're in the information age, and food, water, drink, internet, those are the bottom of the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy. I mean, this is the new reality we just realized. If you didn't have the internet after social distancing, you were up a creek, So yeah, I mean, look, we need to restructure society, I think. So hopefully coronavirus is doing it for us. If it's done a lot of damage, but maybe this will be a good thing.
I can tell you, Sina, what it's done for me. For 40 years, I traveled and I ate food outside. Now I can make you the best khoresh in the world, and I can make you anything you want. And that's all due to online learning.
Absolutely.
Can I want to bring in Ahmed,
I think,
who's one of our committee. Ahmed is an interesting case because he's based in Cairo in Egypt, and he was offered a place at Harvard GSD and offered a 50% scholarship, but couldn't find that other 50%. So Ahmed is a great. Ahmed, over to you. You ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. The talk is very amazing. I got very inspired what we said, but I have a very critical question. That education can available for everyone. Nowadays, university requires high fees. Most of universities, most of what we mentioned while discussing today, it is you can reach knowledge, but in a high cost. So why we don't mention the point of a free education? Digital Future is offering a free PhD program in Shanghai. Also, there is other program, DIA, that Professor Neil involved in establishing that program. It is very cheap that anyone can join. I had hundreds of friends join that program from Egypt, and it's the fees for the university is available for everyone, so you can join. Just you need the living cost. So when we talk the future of education and being online and so on and reduced cost, the main point to discuss is how much is the fees. I'm teaching at the American University in Cairo, and my students started to discuss with each other on Facebook, on the university groups. We are paying too much fees, but we are learning online. This is out my university, but what about the international world? The point Professor Nader discussed, that the fees may be reduced, but we are, as a discussion board, must think of the fees, because students living in Middle East, living in India, or in some places all around the world, in Africa, a lot of African countries, Middle Africa and Upper Africa don't have the availability to pay this thousands of fees. When I messaged my professor at Harvard, I told him I was sending him for a master's. I'm graduate from Cairo University with excellent grade, 3.9. And he told me, I can, for the specific program you are sending me, I can offer you just 50%. I told him in an email how I can offer the other 50%. Thank you.
Well, I just want to clarify. I think there's a difference between learning and the certificate. We pay. I mean, this unfortunate thing is we have a system by which the certificate has become hard to procure.
Yes, but if you got learning, if you got learning with no certificate, how you will have a job?
Well, so we could democratize the certification.
I don't know.
Well, just imagine if you could.
Yeah, right. If you go for DSAW, you will learn and got a certificate so you can have a job. If you go for DigitalFUTURES, you will learn and get certificate that approves that you learn it, that you can have a job and move forward in your life. So the point is, one day I messaged, I have to mention, I started Learning for Everyone initiative in Egypt 3 years ago, and traveled for around 11 or to 10 universities, public universities, for free to teach the students computational design and digital tools and so on. I'm using digital tools around 11 years ago, involved with Egyptian consultant in one of the Hadid projects in Egypt. So I traveled for around 10 universities in Cairo, teaching them for free the digital tools, the know-how, how to use these tools and so on. But the point is, if they got learning like this with no certificate, there will be no availability for them in the international market or the local markets or anywhere. It's a requirement.
Imagine a new kind of university. Okay, here's what happens. You do whatever you want to do to learn. You attend a college, you don't, you learn online, you learn by watching. At any point in your life, you can attend a 1-week camp at AUC, American University of Cairo, where they ask you to do things, they give you an exam, they ask you to build a model, they put you through your paces. And if you finish and you satisfy the examiners, you have a degree.
Yeah, good point.
Just imagine if we could do that. And you get a bachelor's degree, a master's degree.
Yes, that would be amazing.
I'm not sure why we don't do that today. I think it's because of an economic structure of education. I think to Sarita's point, that we don't want to upset. But you could do that today.
I remember 1 year ago, I messaged the University of People in USA, and I told him I have the professors that can do the strategy and the structure and can offer the learning for a master in architecture. But he told me the regulations in the country will prevent them to give that certificate. So I think we should have an international initiative that pushes governments to move forward. Yeah, thank you.
I mean, just kind of follow up, Ahmed. I mean, having taught at DESA, which is an interesting example, you know, and of course, Sina is teaching there now as well. I mean, one thing that I always say about that is I discovered in Dessau, we were kind of operating in the Bauhaus. It was amazing in many ways. But what I discovered there is we had students basically from all the poor countries. So from countries like sort of Bangladesh or Macedonia or so on and so on. And one thing that became very clear to me was the top 2% in any culture, in any country, were good, but most of them didn't have access to that education. And I had students, my Bangladesh students, all of whom were brilliant. You know, they went back and they became professors back in Bangladesh, but they'd been offered places at the AA, DRL, very similar to Ahmed's situation, and couldn't afford to go there. So I think, you know, that is in some ways is the huge kind of question. But I wanted to pick up on something that Sanjay said, which was, are we seeing a distinction now between the kind of freely available online forms of education, such as MOOCs or such as TED Talks or Digital Futures and so on, and the university, where the university now gets redefined as a degree awarding institution, almost as like you're going to go along to get your driving test or something, you go along to the DMV or something. Is that the kind of shift we're making?
I don't think we are. We should.
We shouldn't.
I mean, it also depends where we are, no? The majority of the universities in Europe, they are for free. I mean, they are public. You need to take exams to enter, but the whole education is, I mean, I went to public university and my education was for free back in Greece, and the same happens here in Spain. So I think it's I mean, there are different kind of places that need to reorganize the way that education is being conceived, being operated, and eventually being delivered, quote unquote, no? It should be a basic service offered to citizens. There is no doubt about this. And that does not mean that there should not be private colleges or institutions. This is already happening in Europe as well, but in a way we need to have this offer as a service, no? This is fundamental.
Yeah, I have a, yeah.
Go, me.
No, okay, no, one thing that I want to put all these comments together in a way, but maybe I'm going to do a mess, but I wanted to say that in a way, today about this comment about if the teacher is or educator is who has all the secrets. And today, I mean, in my experience, I could assist to different lectures from different universities all over the world that I couldn't do it before, what I think is a really good thing. I mean, I 2 days ago, I made a question to Peter Eichmann, which for me was absolutely impossible to do it before. I took this course and workshop in Digital Futures, so I could make questions to Nelic, to Sanford Quinter, to Anton Piquan, to Marika Trott, to people that I could never keep in contact maybe in another situation. So this crisis helped me to talk with people that I would never talk before, that I could never talk before. And I think in a way, what this shows us is that nobody have the answers. And this crisis is showing us that nobody has the answer. The biggest professor in the world doesn't have the answers as well. So I could make questions to people that nobody can answer to me, because we are building the answers together. And what is more important, we are building the questions together. So I think that in a way, it's something good. I mean, I'm too optimistic all the time about certain things, but I think that this global kind of global classroom or a network that we are building together is going to be something important to show us that in reality, there is not certain hierarchies that we think that exist in between who has the knowledge. I mean, the teacher is not the person who can answer you all the questions. It's just something, it's just someone who is thinking with you. So maybe in this way, a kind of, I mean, this difference that you talk about to get a degree and to get the knowledge. I think that today is more important to get the knowledge than to get the degree, because finally, what is going to I mean, if everything is collapsing, what are you going to do with your degree? I mean, I don't know. We are in a crisis situation. Everything is burning a lot. You open the window and you don't know, you turn on your computer, you don't know what is going on next, tomorrow. So, I mean, maybe I'm too optimistic about this, but I think there are incredible opportunities for all the students. Of course, that you have to speak English, which is absolutely difficult for some people that they don't have this access yet. But if you can do it, you have this opportunity right now.
Forgive me, I've got to run, but thank you very much. Again, my sincere apologies for all the confusion this morning. And thanks for rolling with the punches. Nader, great to see you. Areti, lovely to talk to you. Good to meet
Sanjay,
you all.
Can I just say, this has been one of the most magic 2 hours of my life so far. I've learned so much from you. And I think, you know, we all have, and we can all go back and this will be uploaded onto YouTube and revisited and so on. So I just want to thank you. This has really been very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about the confusion earlier. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Sanjay.
Bye-bye.
I just jump in because I also have to go.
Okay.
So thank you, everybody, for the discussion, and Neil for the setup. I'm looking forward to continue this discussion further.
And Nader, I'm going to come to your house for lunch one of these days.
Absolutely. It's always open.
Thanks. Take care.
So thanks, Areti, too. We can carry on for a bit longer if you'd like. But thank you, Areti. Thank you, Sanjay. That was terrific.
Neil, I think I'll have to drop off too. I'm an old lady and it's 10 o'clock.
Okay. Well,
thank you, Neil. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Nader.
Sarita, thank you. I want to thank you all, not only for today, but also for bringing so many Indian students to Digital Futures World. It was amazing to be able to see them on the screen. And thank you for your contributions as well for that conference, amazing conference 2 years ago.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I think that we're in a situation now where it would make sense to just to wrap things up, but actually it's not the end of this session. I feel like it's the beginning of a longer discussion that we need to kind of keep on raising and probing, and a series of questions that need to be asked about education. And I think this was just a wonderful example of what we in Digital Futures had imagined. I mean, one of the things that we discovered was basically when suddenly we all found ourselves using Zoom conversations, getting our groceries online and had contactless payment, was that actually the digital future we were talking about is already here. It's already here. And one of the things that we imagined was a possibility that there's no point having lectures. We might as well have panel discussions where we bring people across the world together. And I think we're discovering together the possibilities afforded by the digital. And I think that what it is, I mean, we've seen today just evidence of that. It's been astonishing to have Sarita in Mumbai, and Sanjay in MIT, and Areti in Barcelona, and all the rest of you. So let's continue this discussion. This is something I think we haven't got the answers. We've certainly got some of the questions. And this was it's a very rewarding experience. So thank you so much to our speakers. And let's continue this with some follow-up sessions to come. I should say that next week we have a special presentation of keynote speeches on the theme of computational design. And every single Saturday, we are going to continue at the same time. This is, I should say, the one moment in the 24-hour calendar where everything overlaps. People are awake in China and the West Coast, East Coast of Europe at the same time. And we're trying to make this thing every single week. So please come and join us, and we will continue next Saturday. So thank you again to everyone. This has been a fantastic session. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.